Two brothers inherited a barren island for free. What they found buried in the rocks would destroy lives, including their own. Marcus and Daniel Kaine stood on the weathered ferry dock in Port Sullivan, staring at the paperwork their uncle's lawyer had just handed them. The document was simple, almost suspiciously so. Full ownership of Blackstone Island, a 12-acre mass of granite and twisted pines sitting 3 miles off the Georgia coast. No conditions attached. No fees required. No catch, except that their Uncle Vincent had drowned there 6 months ago under circumstances the county coroner had called consistent with accidental death by misadventure. Marcus read the phrase 3 times, his calloused fingers tracing the typed words. He was 34, a construction foreman with forearms like iron and a face weathered from years working under the southern sun. Beside him, Daniel was quieter, 31, an accountant who still wore his work shirt and tie despite the coastal humidity that made everything stick. They looked like brothers, shared the same dark hair and sharp jawline, but moved through the world differently. Marcus confronted problems head-on. Daniel calculated them first. The lawyer who delivered the documents was a thin man named Howard Pitts. He had the kind of face that looked like it apologized for existing, all nervous angles and receding hairline. His suit was expensive but hung wrong on his narrow frame, and his eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, kept sliding away whenever either brother tried to hold his gaze. "I don't understand," Daniel said, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Uncle Vincent and our father didn't speak for 20 years. We never even met the man. Why would he leave us anything, let alone an entire island?" Pitts shifted his weight in the cafe booth, his fingers drumming once against the manila folder before going still. "Your uncle's wishes were explicit in his will. The island passes to his only living relatives jointly. He was very clear about that specification. Very clear indeed." "But why?" Marcus pressed, leaning forward. "What's on this island? What did he do there?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss your uncle's private affairs beyond the legal transfer of property." Pitts was already gathering his briefcase, already standing. "The deed is legitimate. The island is yours. What you do with it is entirely your decision." He slid a business card across the scarred table, embossed letters, expensive stock, and walked out of Big Mary's dockside cafe faster than a man should walk away from clients he'd just made property owners. The bell above the door chimed his exit, and through the salt-stained window, the brothers watched him climb into a black sedan that seemed too new, too clean for Port Sullivan's dusty streets. Marcus picked up the business card. "Pitts and Associates, Estate Law." He flipped it over. Nothing on the back. "You ever heard of this firm?" "No," Daniel said quietly, his accountant's mind already working the angles. "And free property doesn't exist, Marcus. Not in the real world. Property has value even when it's worthless. The land itself, mineral rights, development potential. Someone always wants something. Uncle Vincent drowned out there." Marcus tapped the deed. Coroner said accidental, but... He trailed off, not wanting to voice the suspicion that had been building since Pitts walked in. "But uncles don't drown in 3 feet of water," Daniel finished. "Not unless something else happened first." They sat in silence while the ceiling fan wobbled overhead and the smell of fried fish drifted from the kitchen. Big Mary herself, a woman built like a lighthouse with arms that could crack crab shells barehanded, leaned across the counter and studied them with the frank curiosity of someone who'd lived in Port Sullivan for 60 years and knew when strangers brought trouble. "Y'all talking about Vincent Kaine's island?" she called out. Both brothers turned. "You knew our uncle?" Marcus asked. Big Mary wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the linoleum. "Knew of him. He'd come into town once a month for supplies. Never said much. Kept to himself. But people talk, especially in a place this small. Your uncle spent 32 years on that island, and in all that time, nobody knew what he was doing out there." "What do people think he was doing?" Daniel asked. She shrugged her massive shoulders. "Some said he was running from something. Others figured he was crazy, living alone like that. But I saw him a few times. He wasn't crazy. He was scared. Scared of what? Big Mary's expression shifted, became more guarded. That, I don't know. But I'll tell you this, 3 days before he died, he came in here and ordered the biggest breakfast I make. Ate every bite like it was his last meal. Then he looked at me and said, "Mary, if something happens to me, tell whoever comes asking that the truth is worth dying for, but only if someone lives to tell it." The words hung in the humid air like smoke. Marcus felt something cold slide down his spine despite the heat. "Did you tell the police?" "Told the sheriff." He wrote it down, put it in a file, and that was that. Vincent drowned. Case closed. The Thorns wanted it that way. "Who are the Thorns?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice sharp. Big Mary glanced toward the window, toward the black sedan that was still parked across the street, engine running. "You boys should be careful asking questions like that in this town. The Thorns own most of it. The cannery, the marina, half the real estate. Been powerful around here for generations." "And your uncle's island?" She paused, her voice dropping lower. "That used to be Thorn property, way back. Colin Thorn owned it before your uncle bought it in some kind of debt settlement 32 years ago. Word is the family never forgave that loss." Marcus and Daniel exchanged a look. The kind of look brothers develop over a lifetime, where entire conversations happen in a glance. "We're going out there," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Big Mary nodded slowly, like she'd expected nothing less. "Ferry runs twice daily when the weather's good. Captain Lyle will take you across." "But boys?" She fixed them both with a stare that had seen too much to be anything but honest. "Whatever your uncle found on that island, it got him killed. The law says accident, but the law in Port Sullivan listens to the Thorns. You go digging around out there, you best be ready for what you find." The crossing. The ferry to Blackstone Island was a flat-bottomed workboat that smelled like diesel and old fish. Captain Lyle was a wiry man in his 60s with skin like tanned leather and eyes the color of storm water. He took their money without comment, gestured for them to climb aboard, and fired up the engine with a roar that sent gulls scattering from the pilings. The water was choppy, gray-green and restless under a sky that threatened rain. Port Sullivan shrank behind them, becoming a smudge of buildings against the coastline, while ahead, Blackstone Island grew larger with each passing minute. Marcus stood at the bow, one hand gripped on the rail, watching the island take shape. It wasn't pretty. A crooked spine of black granite thrust up from the Atlantic like broken vertebrae, topped with a thick tangle of scrub pines that grew at angles, bent by constant wind. No beaches, just shelves of rock that dropped straight into the water, dark and jagged and somehow hostile. Daniel stayed near the cabin, going through the papers Pitts had left them. The file was thin. Too thin. The deed, a property survey from 1993, and a single page will that transferred ownership to Marcus James Kaine and Daniel Vincent Kaine, in equal share, with the stipulation that neither may sell nor transfer said property without mutual consent for a period of 10 years following transfer. "That's weird," Daniel said, loud enough to be heard over the engine. Marcus turned. "What?" "The restriction. We can't sell the island for 10 years. Why would Uncle Vincent care what we do with it after he's dead?" "Maybe he wanted to make sure we actually looked at it," Marcus suggested. "Make sure we didn't just flip it immediately." "Or maybe he wanted to make sure someone else couldn't buy it," Daniel countered. "Like the Thorns." Captain Lyle cut the engine back to idle, and the sudden quiet was startling. He stepped out of the cabin, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You boys the Kaine nephews?" "We are," Marcus confirmed. Lyle nodded, squinting through the smoke. "Thought so. You look like Vincent. He had that same stubborn set to his jaw." He paused. "I was the one who found him, you know. Morning of March 14th. I came to bring his monthly supply delivery, and he wasn't on the dock. Found him face down in the shallows off the north shore. Rocks all around him, water barely up to his knees." "What do you think happened?" Daniel asked quietly. The captain was silent for a long moment, studying the island ahead. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Your uncle was the most sure-footed man I ever met. 32 years on those rocks, and I never saw him stumble once. And that night, the night he died, the weather was calm. No storm, no rough seas. Just a clear March night with a full moon. But? Marcus prompted, hearing the word hanging unspoken. But the rocks where I found him were marked up. Scraped, like something heavy had been dragged across them. In Vincent's hands, Lyle drew on his cigarette, the tip glowing orange. His hands were torn up bad. Not from the fall. From digging. Like he'd been clawing at stone with his bare fingers. The image settled over them like a cold fog. Marcus tried to picture it, his uncle, alone in the dark, desperate enough to tear his hands apart on granite. What could drive a man to that? Did you tell the police? Daniel asked. Told the sheriff everything I just told you. He took photos, wrote it up, and the coroner ruled accidental death. Case closed inside 48 hours. Lyle's expression was unreadable. Sheriff Ross is a good man, but he's also got 3 kids in college and a mortgage. The Thorns own the bank that holds his note. You understand what I'm saying? Marcus understood perfectly. The truth had a price, and not everyone could afford to pay it. Lyle gunned the engine again, and they covered the last half-mile in silence. As they approached the island's single dock, a weathered structure of treated timber that looked older than it should, Marcus noticed something that made his skin prickle. Fresh marks in the wood. Boot prints in the thin layer of algae that covered the planks. Someone had been here recently. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. Captain, Marcus said as they tied off, when was the last time anyone else came out here? Lyle followed his gaze to the prints, and something flickered across his face. I'm the only ferry that services this island. I haven't brought anyone since your uncle died. Then who made those tracks? The captain didn't answer. He just handed them their bags, climbed back into his boat, and said, I'll be back tomorrow at sunset. You need to leave before then. Use the emergency radio in Vincent's cabin. It's set to channel 16. Someone will hear you. What if we need help? Daniel asked. Lyle met his eyes, and for the first time, Marcus saw something that looked like fear in the old sailor's face. Then you better pray someone gets here before the Thorns do. He pulled away from the dock without another word, the boat's wake churning white against the dark water. The brothers stood alone on Blackstone Island, surrounded by rocks and pines in the growing sense that they'd just crossed into territory where the normal rules didn't apply. Marcus picked up his bag and looked at his brother. Still want to leave? Daniel stared at the boot prints, at the trees that seemed to lean in too close, at the path that disappeared into shadow. We came this far, he said quietly. And Uncle Vincent left us this place for a reason. I think we owe it to him to find out why. They followed the path inland, leaving the sound of the ocean behind. Neither brother noticed the figure watching them from the treeline, binoculars glinting in the filtered sunlight, or radio already pressed to someone's lips with a message, they're here. Just like Vincent said they'd come. The island had been waiting. And now it had them. Marcus Kaine sat in the cramped office of Barrett & Sons Construction, staring at the numbers on his computer screen that refused to add up the way he needed them to. The company was bleeding money. 6 months of delayed contracts, 2 major clients who'd gone bankrupt mid-project, and a loan payment due in 30 days that he couldn't make. $47,000 stood between him and foreclosure. Between him and the business his father had built over 40 years before a heart attack took him 3 years ago. He rubbed his eyes, the exhaustion settling into his bones. Outside the trailer window, the construction yard was quiet. Half the equipment sat idle under tarps. He'd already laid off 8 men, good workers with families who'd been with the company for years. The thought of letting more go made him physically sick. His phone buzzed. Daniel's name on the screen. Tell me you have good news, Marcus said, not bothering with hello. I wish I did. His brother's voice was tight, strained in the way it got when the numbers were bad. I went through everything again. There's no mistake, Marcus. Without a significant cash infusion in the next 30 days, you're going to have to declare bankruptcy. I'm sorry. Marcus closed his eyes. Barrett and Sons had survived 2 recessions, the 2008 crash, and countless slow seasons. His father had poured everything into this business, his time, his money, his health. And now Marcus was going to be the one who lost it. What about my house? He asked quietly. If I sell? You're already underwater on the mortgage. The market's down, and you owe more than it's worth. Even if you could sell it fast, which you can't, it wouldn't cover what you need. Daniel paused. Marcus, I'm sorry. I've run every scenario. There's no good option here. They sat in silence across the phone line. 2 brothers who'd lost their father too soon and were now losing his legacy piece by piece. What about you? Marcus finally asked. How are you holding up? Daniel's laugh was bitter. I'm about to be unemployed. Jennings and Associates is downsizing. They're cutting 15 positions next week, and I'm on the list. Apparently, 10 years of service doesn't mean much when the partners need to protect their profit margins. Jesus, Daniel. Yeah. Another pause. Stephanie's talking about going back to work full-time. The twins start kindergarten in 6 months, and we can't afford the private school we'd planned. Hell, we can barely afford groceries right now. I've been burning through our savings just to keep the mortgage current. Marcus heard the weight in his brother's voice, the specific shame that comes from being unable to provide for your family, from watching your children's future shrink because you can't hold back the tide of bad luck and worse timing. We'll figure something out, Marcus said, knowing it was hollow. Yeah, Daniel replied, not believing it either. We always do. But this time felt different. This time felt like the end of something. The letter. The certified letter arrived 3 days later. Marcus almost didn't open it. He'd gotten good at recognizing collection notices and legal threats by the envelope alone. But this one was different. Heavier paper, embossed return address, Pitts and Associates, Estate Law, Savannah, Georgia. He opened it standing at his kitchen counter, coffee going cold in his mug. Dear Mr. Marcus James Kaine and Mr. Daniel Vincent Kaine. It is my duty to inform you of the death of your paternal uncle, Vincent Samuel Kaine, who passed away on March 14th of this year. As his only living relatives, you have been named as joint beneficiaries in his last will and testament. Please contact our offices at your earliest convenience to arrange for the transfer of property as specified in the attached documents. Marcus read it 3 times before the words actually registered. Uncle Vincent. He barely remembered the man, a vague figure from childhood who'd had some falling out with their father before Marcus was 10. He'd asked about it once when he was 12, and his father had said, Vincent made choices I couldn't support. Sometimes family means knowing when to walk away. That was it. The only explanation he'd ever gotten. He called Daniel immediately. You get a letter from a lawyer in Savannah? Marcus asked. Yeah, just open it. Uncle Vincent died? I didn't even know he was still alive. Neither did I. But apparently we're his only heirs. Heirs to what? Daniel's voice carried that careful tone he used when examining contracts for hidden clauses. The letter mentions property but doesn't specify. That's unusual. Estate lawyers are usually very precise about assets. There's a meeting scheduled. Port Sullivan, Georgia. 3 days from now. Marcus heard papers shuffling on Daniel's end. Port Sullivan, that's coastal. About a 4-hour drive from here. A pause. You thinking what I'm thinking? That an uncle we haven't seen in 25 years just died and left us something valuable enough to require a face-to-face meeting? Exactly. Daniel's voice had shifted, taking on that analytical edge. Marcus, people don't summon you to coastal Georgia for a box of keepsakes. They're transferring real property. Land, probably. Maybe a house. How much would coastal property be worth? Depends on location, size, development potential. but even undeveloped waterfront land in Georgia can run 50 to 100,000 an acre. Maybe more. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, not quite hope, not yet, but something close. That could save the business. That could save both of us, Daniel replied quietly. But Marcus, there's always a catch. Property nobody wants ends up with distant relatives. The good stuff gets sold off by the estate to cover debts. Maybe Uncle Vincent didn't have debts. Maybe. Or maybe whatever he's leaving us is worthless, and the lawyer just wants us to sign it over so they can close the file. Marcus stared at the letter, at his uncle's name written in neat legal type. Vincent Samuel Kaine. He tried to remember anything about the man, any conversation, any moment that might explain why he'd disappeared from their lives. But there was nothing. Just absence and his father's hard-edged silence whenever the name came up. "We have to go," Marcus said. "Even if it's nothing, we have to know." "I'll pick you up Thursday morning," Daniel agreed. "We'll drive down together." "Daniel?" Marcus hesitated, then pushed forward. "What if this is real? What if Uncle Vincent actually left us something that matters?" His brother was quiet for a moment. Then maybe the universe is apologizing for the last 3 years. God knows we're due. The drive. They left before dawn on Thursday, Daniel's Honda sedan loaded with overnight bags they probably wouldn't need. The drive south took them through pine forests and small towns that looked like they'd been left behind by progress, places where the gas stations still had full-service pumps and the diners served breakfast all day. Daniel drove while Marcus read through everything he could find online about Port Sullivan. It wasn't much. Population 3,400. Main industries, commercial fishing, boat repair, and tourism that never quite materialized. The town's Wikipedia page was 3 paragraphs long and hadn't been updated since 2019. "There's not much here," Marcus said, scrolling on his phone. "Just a small fishing town that's been slowly dying for the last 30 years. What about our uncle? Anything on him?" Marcus searched. Nothing. No social media, no business records, no news mentions. It's like he didn't exist. "Everyone exists somewhere," Daniel said. "You just have to know where to look." But after another hour of searching, Marcus had to admit defeat. Vincent Kaine had erased himself from the digital world completely. Whatever life he'd lived on that island, he'd lived it alone and invisible. They crossed into Georgia as the sun climbed higher, and the landscape shifted, more water, more marshland, the smell of salt and decay drifting through the vents. Daniel pulled off at a rest stop, and they ate gas station sandwiches while 18-wheelers rumbled past. "You nervous?" Daniel asked. Marcus considered it. "More curious than nervous." "What about you?" "I'm an accountant. I'm always nervous." But he smiled when he said it, and Marcus saw a glimpse of the brother he'd grown up with, before mortgages and responsibilities and the weight of adult life had settled over both of them like a heavy coat. They reached Port Sullivan just after noon. The town looked exactly like its Wikipedia page suggested: weathered buildings, boats that had seen better years, and a main street where half the storefronts were empty. The law office was above a bait shop, accessed by an external staircase that creaked under their weight. Howard Pitts was younger than his voice on the phone suggested, maybe 40, with thinning hair and a nervous energy that made him seem like he'd rather be anywhere else. His office was small, dominated by file cabinets and a desk covered in folders. Through the window, Marcus could see the harbor and, beyond it, the gray line of the Atlantic. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming." Pitts gestured to 2 chairs that faced his desk. "I'll try to make this brief. Your uncle's estate is simple. No liquid assets, no debts, no personal effects of value. Just the island." "Blackstone Island?" Daniel asked, pulling out a notepad. "Correct. 12 acres, undeveloped, 3 miles offshore. Your uncle purchased it in 1993 from the Thorne family estate as settlement for unpaid debts. He lived there alone for 32 years until his death this past March." Marcus leaned forward. "How did he die?" Pitts shifted uncomfortably. The official ruling was accidental drowning. He was found in shallow water off the North Shore. The sheriff's investigation concluded there were no suspicious circumstances. But Daniel pressed, hearing what wasn't being said. But your uncle was an experienced seaman and an expert on those rocks. The circumstances of his death raised questions that were never fully answered. Pitts pulled a file from his desk and slid it across. This is everything: the deed, the property survey, and your uncle's will. The island is yours, jointly, with one stipulation: neither of you can sell or transfer the property without mutual consent for 10 years. Why? Marcus asked. Your uncle didn't explain his reasoning in the will. He only insisted on that specific clause. Daniel was already reading through the documents, his accountant's eyes catching details. The property has no assessed value. How is that possible? It's classified as undevelopable due to its geological composition and lack of infrastructure. No water, no power, no safe harbor. It's essentially worthless from a real estate perspective. Marcus felt that fragile hope deflating. So we inherited 12 acres of rocks we can't sell and couldn't sell anyway because they're worthless. I'm afraid that's accurate, Pitts said, and Marcus could swear he heard relief in the lawyer's voice, like he was glad to be delivering bad news because it meant this meeting would end faster. But Daniel was still reading, his finger tracing lines of text. Wait. This property survey is from 1993, but there's a notation here dated 6 weeks before Uncle Vincent died. Someone did a new geological assessment. Pitts stiffened slightly. I'm not aware of any recent survey. It's right here. Daniel turned the page around. March 2nd of this year. 12 days before his death. Someone from Thorn Marine Resources conducted a core sample analysis of the island's bedrock. Why would they do that if the property is worthless? The room went very quiet. Through the window, Marcus could hear seagulls crying and the distant sound of boat engines. Pitts had gone still, his face carefully neutral. I couldn't say, he finally answered. Perhaps you should speak with the Thorn family directly if you have questions about their activities. We're asking you, Marcus said, his voice harder. You're the estate lawyer. You must know why they were testing the rocks. Pitts stood up abruptly. Gentlemen, my responsibility was to transfer the property to you in accordance with your uncle's will. That's been accomplished. The island is yours. What you do with it is your decision. He was already gathering their papers, already ushering them toward the door. If you need anything else, you have my card. They found themselves in the hallway before either brother could protest, the office door clicking shut behind them with a finality that felt deliberate. Marcus and Daniel stood on the stairs, looking at each other. He was scared, Daniel said quietly. Yeah. Marcus looked down at the deed in his hands. Uncle Vincent left us an island that's supposedly worthless. But 12 days before he died, the Thorn family, the same family that used to own this island, was out there taking rock samples. And now our uncle is dead, ruled accidental, and the lawyer can't get us out of his office fast enough. This isn't about worthless land, Daniel said, his mind already working the angles. This is about something valuable. Something Uncle Vincent found or knew about. Something worth killing for. They walked down to the street and stood in the coastal sunlight, watching the town move around them. A few locals glanced their way with curious eyes, and Marcus felt suddenly exposed, like they'd walked into something bigger than they understood. What do we do? He asked. Daniel folded the deed carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. We go to the island. We find out what Uncle Vincent knew. And we figure out why the Thorns want it badly enough to kill for it. This could be dangerous. We're already broke, Marcus. We've got nothing left to lose. But standing there in Port Sullivan, with the smell of salt in the air and the weight of secrets pressing down, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they had everything to lose. They just didn't know it yet. They walked back to the car in silence, neither brother noticing the black sedan parked across the street, or the man inside speaking quietly into a phone. They took the bait. They're going to the island. informed Mr. Thorne. The trap had been set 32 years ago. And Marcus and Daniel Kaine had just walked into it.